Kavita is very unfortunately unwell. We would have learned from her perspectives, both from a regional standpoint, but also because of long years of experience in Bangladesh. But let me start by introducing the panel. I'm starting with Professor Vinod Sharma. Professor Vinod Sharma is the Vice Chairman of the Sikkim State Disaster Management Authority. He is also a Senior Professor at the Indian Institute of Public Administration. For those who do not know, I just want to make a mention that he played a pivotal role in the formation of the institution that is now known as National Institute of Disaster Management under the Ministry of Home Affairs in India. And of course, everyone in India knows that NIDM, as it is called in short, is the premier agency in India. And he's been a leader in the field of DRR through various academic and government institutions at the national and international level. I have myself had multiple interactions with Professor Sharma, and I know for a fact that he is one person who brings theory and practice together. So he's inside the government. He has interacted with a lot of practitioners, so he knows the challenges on both sides and has experience from both sides. So welcome, Professor Sharma. I would now like to introduce His Excellency Mr. M Q Haidari. His Excellency Mr. M Q Haidari is the Deputy Minister for Disaster Management and Humanitarian Affairs in the government of Afghanistan, and also the coordinator at Afghanistan National Disaster Management. He has over a decade's senior leadership experience in coordination, management, and evaluation of humanitarian and social development programs in post-conflict areas. And Mr. Haidari is a well-known leader in South Asia, and brings a lot of experience in the area of disaster management. Welcome, His Excellency Mr. M Q Haidari, and we are actually looking forward to hearing from your perspectives and experience. I'm now introducing Professor Daanish Mustafa. Professor Mustafa is a professor of critical geography at King's College London in UK, and as an academic, he has contributed widely to teaching, research, and policy related work. He has been the recipient of the School of Social Science and Public Policy Excellence in Teaching Award. He was the co-author of the first climate change response strategies for Pakistan, in addition to being the lead author for the United Nations Development Program in Pakistan, 5-year flood response strategy, and has numerous other publications in the field of water resources, geography, environmental hazards, development, and critical geographies of violence and terror. So he comes with a lot of experience in the region, and he can also share a lot of practitioner perspective, as well as his perspective as an academic. Welcome, Professor Daanish Mustafa. I am now introducing a friend, Dr. Neera Shrestha Pradhan. Dr. Pradhan is a senior water and adaptation specialist at ICIMOD in Nepal. Dr. Pradhan has about 2 decades of experience as program manager and subject specialist in the field of river basin management, community-based adaptation, disaster risk reduction, environmental management and impact assessment, and freshwater conservation and management. And I know for a fact that Oxfam and ICIMOD have worked together in the TROSA project, and we have often benefited from her perspectives and experience. Welcome, Dr. Neera Shrestha Pradhan. So if I can, without spending too much of time about the topic, because it is by now absolutely clear that we are discussing a very important topic of paramount importance for the region. I would want to start with Professor Vinod Sharma, and I'm sorry, and Professor Sharma is going to talk about the regional cooperation for disaster governance in South Asia, challenges and opportunities. So, Professor Sharma, would you want to start?
Thank you very much, Pankaj-ji. Thanks a lot for your introduction, your nice words, and I'm delighted, to join this important webinar today. Sir, am I audible? Can you hear me?
You are absolutely audible, sir.
Thank you. I also join Pankaj in welcoming, His Excellency Mr. Haidari, and I heard him several times, and he is one of the committed, politicians in the region, and I know him, since Asian meeting on disaster risk reduction in India, and outside India also I heard him, and I am so glad that people of his, knowledge, they are in the politics, and they want to do something in disaster risk reduction. I also welcome Professor Daanish and Neera Shrestha ji, and Kavita ji couldn't join. So I think all the panelists, and I never say I am, I know anything in disaster management. I always say that I am a learner. And this will also be a learning opportunity for me by listening to such eminent people and discussing this important issue with colleagues. I compliment, Oxfam India, Oxfam Bangladesh, and all organizers that they selected this topic. And I think I'm associated with Oxfam since last 2 decades or maybe more. And I know that they are really interested in regional cooperation. And I was part of one program which was started by Oxfam for 3 countries, Nepal, India, and Bangladesh, that was on flood management. And I attended few meetings in Nepal and in India, and I could see that, this is progressing well. But I think after 1 year, we couldn't do much, in that. And the program, or such type of program need political will. And I think those days, nobody was interested in the, topic like regional cooperation. There were many other issues on agenda, like economic cooperation and all these things. And people were not thinking that disaster risk reduction is important. But now, I think things have changed. And after Hugo framework, after Sindai framework in 2015, I think now it is known to all of us that this is one of very important area. And when we are talking about disaster risk governance, this governance will start, from the region. I think region is also very important. It is not only national and provincial or local government. I think even the regional governance is important when we talk about the, on the second priority of Sindai. And I will say that unless and until there is some understanding that how important is this, this cannot be achieved. I think I will give two examples. One is flood, another is cyclone. We have some cooperation. I will not say that we are not having regional cooperation. We are passing on, all relevant information to Pakistan. We are giving this information to Bangladesh. Even in cyclone, we have very good arrangement with Bangladesh. And because India is in cyclone forecasting, warning, I think we are next to none. And I think this cooperation between India and Bangladesh, this is a case study. We are providing each and every information in advisory to Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is benefited, by that. Even tsunami warning system, when India formed the tsunami warning system, one of the major objective was this. We spent more than $300 million just to, not for India, because India was affected after 200 years, but I think for the reason. And this was a very good initiative that time and highly appreciated, by the region, particularly by Sri Lanka and other countries. And luckily, today we have the tsunami warning system, which is, equally good or maybe better than the existing one in the world. I would like to say one or two things, before we discuss this issue. Uh, I was told that I should talk about the challenges. I will give you two examples. One example is ASEAN, and 10 ASEAN countries, they have one ASEAN, one response. I think the idea which is given by ASEAN should be adopted by SAARC. Unfortunately, SAARC countries, we have SAARC disaster management, institute. We are working. India has spent a lot of money on that. It was in Delhi. Now it is shifted to Gujarat. But I think it need more commitment. It need more investment and regional cooperation. Unless and until all partner countries are not contributing to it, they are not thinking that it is important for all of us, I think this will not give dividend. And but the beginning was made. I mean, I was in Nepal 2006, and I was part of making this draft on this SARC Center for Disaster Management. And I realized that capacity building is very important area and we should do something. And I was very happy, in preparing the concept paper for SARC meeting. Uh, but you can see that I will not say that it is not functional, it is working, but I think the functioning of SARC, need more cooperation. Cooperation in the sense that more investment, from partner countries, more understanding of the issue, and then it will be more successful. Another good example of cooperation is European Union. European Union only not only 27 countries but 6 other countries joined them, and now there is 33 countries. They are working together for disaster management, for disaster risk reduction. They are having a protection body. They call it European Union Civil Protection Body, and this is a very important thing which has happened in. And I think Professor Daanish Mustafa, he will certainly mention about it, because people find it a very good initiative. And uh, though there is no case study where they have worked or it, but I think the cooperation is already there, and this cooperation will be very useful. I will just touch 2 points because the time is 10 minutes. One point is, because Sindhi framework is Bible for us, and we should know, the knowing risk, the first priority. I think now with the regional cooperation, with the scientific knowledge in the region which we are having, I think we can make a very good, risk, mapping. And in case we work together, we have expertise today. You can see, any country, now we have vulnerability maps. We have all, many informations. Of course, there is lot to be done. For example, emergency operation center, for example, data, sharing, for example, capacity building. And there are many things, which are lacking. So in case there is a cooperation in the region, then this whole expertise which is available, which is being used, by other countries, that can be utilized first by this region. I will say that capacity building is a very important aspect. I remember that IIPA, Indian Institute of Public Administration, we gave training to about 298 officers from Bangladesh. And whenever I meet them, in India or outside, they remember that you, in every training program on development, you mention about disaster. And whenever something happen in Afghanistan, we remember you. So I think important is that this kind of, capacity building, this should continue. And I will request Excellency Haidari that he has great influence, and I think he should continue this kind of program, maybe, at regional level. And not only Afghani officers, but I think the officers from region can come and have a training program in India or in Bangladesh or in Nepal, or maybe in alternate basis. I know that it need funding, etc. But I will request my friend Pankaj that he should also explore, because Oxfam is always, uh, taking lead in this kind of program. They are mainly conducting program for the non-governmental organizations or civil society. But I think they can join hands with some organization like Indian Institute of Public Administration, and we will be very happy to help him in giving a sort of training or maybe learning from each other. I will not say that we will give training. There is lot of things, in the region we can learn from each other. And I think this should be the concept. We should not think that we know each and everything. I think if we are together, we know so many things and we can share this information. And so I think this kind of initiative, and one of the recommendation of this webinar can be that a big, systematic training program, should be analyzed, should be, organized. And maybe in the COVID days, a start can be made on webinars and, sensitization on flood issues, sensitization of data sharing, use of artificial intelligence, use of social media. I think there are several issues on which, people can be sensitized, and we can make a beginning. When we are when this era is over, I think we can come face to face training. And I tell you, my experience of 30 to 35 years in disaster risk reduction is that capacity building, you invest in training, this is the cheapest way of disaster risk reduction. We don't have that kind of money as Japan and, other countries are having. We cannot make a wall, of several hundred kilometers, because we don't have that kind of money. But certainly our people are very sensitive. We have humanitarian approach. Our people, our officers are very good. And I think we should make use of this and start sensitizing them that regional cooperation is important. You rightly said that there are many challenges, but definitely, if there is a beginning, then definitely the solutions will come, and people will realize that uh, that this is important area. And today we have political will. our Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, in Asian conference, you might be knowing that he gave 10-point program. And the 10th point, if you see, this is the regional cooperation in disaster risk reduction. So I think that is very critical, and we can make use of this. And I'm sure that, and India is, always for cooperation, and I'm sure that we will get political backbone. Thank you very much. Because my time is limited, I will certainly come and discuss some other issues if there is time. But for now, I thank you very much, that you are organizing this. Over to you, Pankaj.
Thank you, sir, for making the time and for sharing your perspectives. And I really do not want to paraphrase or do a summary of what you have said, because I know that I would not be able to do justice to that. But I just want to say that you have very beautifully looked at the evolution of cooperation. And when you said that from very little or no cooperation in the region to gradually cooperation happening, and some examples of cooperation that you have given. But you have also highlighted a number of areas where, in the short term, medium term, and long term, cooperation is possible, can be done, and should be done. And one of the major areas I heard you, talk about in detail was the cooperation in terms of capacity building in the region, because you said we have the talent and competence and the skills and the collective knowledge, and therefore, if we start sharing that knowledge, that can be a good beginning to the regional cooperation. And also that your exhortation to NGOs, and you mentioned Oxfam, is very well taken about what we can do for exploring the opportunities for regional cooperation. But I presume that what you have said is also valid for a lot of participants who are here today, to also explore what inter-organizational cooperation can be done. So thank you so much, sir. And if I can now move on to His Excellency Mr. M Q Haidari. Uh, His Excellency Mr. Haidari will speak about the disaster diplomacy in South Asia, experiences and best practices from Afghanistan. And when he speaks about experiences and best practices from Afghanistan, I understand that we will have a lot of takeaways, and that we can also pick up some pieces for us to analyze and look at in terms of what we can do in our own countries, from whichever country we are in South Asia. So, sir, I am handing over to you, His Excellency Mr. Haidari.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Pankaj. Thank you, Professor Sharma, for your good words about me, and thank you. I'm very happy that today I see a lot of my friends here. So those people who are working in disaster management, we are all around the world. So I think that we are from the one family that working for disaster management. Distinguished participant and organizer from this webinar, first of all, I want to share my greeting on behalf of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, and would like to thank you to organize the providing me this opportunity to speak on the event of celebration International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. Afghanistan government celebrate this event on 13th of October with the participation from the key stakeholders, and number of online participants joined due to restricted physical presence on account of COVID-19 situation. I will start my deliberation with focus on South Asia region, but we'll share some real process and the challenge in terms of disaster risk awareness of Afghanistan that I have the leading this process around more than 1 decade. Countries in South Asia have made remarkable progress in the social and economic development as the world's fastest growing region. Most countries are now classified middle income countries and enjoying improving social indicators. South Asia is one of the most disaster prone region in the world. South Asia is also one of the most densely populated and poorest in the world. Demographic change, rapid urbanization, environmental degradation, and climate fluctuation have increased the people exposure to the natural hazard, resulted frequency and several disasters, and accompanied by the impact of the complex of emergency. In addition, decreasing social economic condition of the some population have increased vulnerable in the region. Government in South Asia are investing in DRR, improving their country's response capacity from the country to the community level. A strengthening of disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk present the second priority of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. The framework includes discussion of the risk and resilience from the both theoretical and the government's perspective, considering idea that are shaping from the common future and the present in the innovation tools and the best practice in the in reducing risk and building resilience. Afghanistan has been saved by numerous disasters in recent years with a high toll of death and displacement. Thousands have been injured, killed, and forced to flee their home as a result of the country's longest standing conflict. The RR has become a major concern for international donors in the Afghanistan government over the past decades. Afghanistan is a clear example of the multi-hazard landscape as one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world. Over the last 3 decades, nearly all the country, 34 provinces have been affected by at least one natural disaster. Afghanistan government has tried to address the issue of the disaster with the various government's mechanism. It has gained the momentum after the commitment with the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction in Afghanistan. Processing like Asian Ministerial Conference, SARC Disaster Management Center, as mentioned by Professor Sharma also, and the other regional and the other regional process that we have in place, like Istanbul process, Health of Asia, has provided with some capacity to steering the disaster risk governance mechanism in Afghanistan. The government of Islamic Republic of Afghanistan has taken various initiatives to address its moderate the risk of the disaster, some of which have been formulated to be in line with the priority of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. Some enactment of the law on disaster response management and preparedness has ensured there is a guiding legislative documents for institutional arrangement for disaster management. In addition, Afghanistan has a national disaster management plan, national adaptation program of the action for the climate change, national framework for peace and development, and the several drafted legislation. Strategies and plan be adapted soon. These guidance documents have established a transition in Afghanistan disaster response oriented government to the disaster risk reduction. There are, however, some challenge with the disaster risk management institutional arrangement in Afghanistan. There are significant challenge in undertaking risk assessment and related data collection attributed to the league response across the level and issue. Encompassing most of the Afghanistan institutional arrangement. Additionally, the various drafted legislation strategies and plans are more relevant to the current Sendai framework priorities. However, they are taking much time to be finalized to be enacted. Creating a backlog in action, including a mainstreaming disaster risk reduction across key development sector in Afghanistan. Afghanistan also, like a national contingency plan, does not have clear guidance to recovery and reconstruction, unless the overall the role of the responsibility of the sub-national authorities, are not clear across all the respective disaster risk management area due to the knowledge of the availability in institutional mechanism at the provincial level. The legislation strategy and plan for DRR and DRM in Afghanistan are gradually delivering a strong legislation foundation with appropriate plan for the activity in line with the HFA and SFDRR. There are, however, some key issues. Firstly, many of the more recent development legislation strategies and plan are still drafted format. Second, there is lack of guidance DRR policy in Afghanistan, making it a challenge to develop a standard for strategies and plans. Thirdly, country also does not have a strong mechanism for the monitoring and complaints, create a challenge in implementation accountability. Lastly, provincial level mechanism is still a revolving process. Hence, it does not have clarity in role and responsibility and coordination mechanism in order to effectively implement DRR and DRM across the level of the government. Neo-national government's structure has started working after the Canadian presidential election, but pieces later slowed due to current COVID-19 situation. And now it is taking shape after the lockdown, and the government have started focusing on the requirement for the disaster risk governance under the new leadership in Myanmar. Some of the recent past disaster and from flood, drought, and avalanche, government of Afghanistan will strengthen the disaster risk governance mechanism to reduce the future risk of the disaster. I'm pleased to be the part of this webinar today, and this kind of interaction open the space for the mutual learning from the regional countries. We can keep this kind of interaction going to mutual support and coordination among the civil society, UN agency, and the civil. And it would play a very crucial role in strengthening and placing the right kind of the risk governance mechanism consideration and changing pattern of the hazard and exposure of the community. With these words, I will like to conclude my talk on disaster risk governance, and will add to the platform from the career as a strong regional platform. Joseph,
Sorry, sir. Just a second. Please mute your mic if you're not speaking. Hello.
Yes.
Sir, please continue.
Okay. Well, ARC2, the platform to create such a strong regional platform inclusive of the government, civil society, and the other relevant stakeholders, so that we all can work toward and the risk reduction and match more cohesive in collective way. So I hope that I can share our best practice from Afghanistan. And again, I want to thank from the organizer and the whole speakers and the team. Thank you very much.
Thank you, His Excellency. And I mean, extremely candid discussion and very candid submission from your side of what has been achieved in Afghanistan, and you also highlighted where the progress that you thought is slightly slow and tardy. Uh, Generally, we don't mind my saying this, but we generally don't find politicians being so candid about where the progress is good and where the progress is slow. But I think what you have highlighted is extremely important. I think what you have highlighted is that, of course, Afghanistan has a serious multi-hazard situation, but you have also highlighted why and how Sendai framework is absolutely paramount and very central to the idea of the entire disaster governance in Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. But in a way, from your discussion, I think the 2-3 takeaways for me are basically that we do need a very strong legislative framework and really good institutional arrangements and framework, and also the importance that you highlighted of the robust contingency planning and monitoring mechanisms. I think extremely important points for, and it doesn't matter which country you are in. I think these are the basic important building blocks of any disaster governance, regional cooperation or basically within the national boundaries. But I understand that this can also be what you have said is also equally important for regional governance of disaster management. I think we would start moving in that direction hopefully soon as a region, because if I take what you have said and what Professor Sharma said, that the regional cooperation has been an evolutionary journey in the region. And I think over a period of time, we will start looking at more and more cooperation. So thank you, sir. Very, very insightful points of view from Afghanistan. And but please stay with us. We will come back for some questions for you. And if I can now request Dr. Neera Shrestha Pradhan to talk about leveraging local to local cooperation at international borders for disaster governance. So without much ado, I am handing it over to you, Dr. Neera.
Thank you so much, Pankaj. Can you see my screen? Oops.
Yes, we could. Yes, it has come back.
Okay, so slideshow is also there, or?
Shobit, can you help Dr. Pradhan with her slides?
Yes, Neeraji, we can't see the slideshow as of now. We can just see the file, the presentation file.
Okay, now is it okay?
Yes, yes, we can see it now.
Is it full screen, or is there something disturbing
No,
here
it's
also?
it's full
Because
screen. Full screen. That might be the
okay,
panel from GoToMeeting. You can minimize
okay,
it. Yeah.
minimize it. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, good. So namaste, everyone. Please allow me to put my video off for the sake of network problem. Thank you for inviting me in this panel and to talk about disaster governance. My presentation will be mainly focusing on leveraging local to local cooperation for disaster governance. So first of all, I would like to mention that when we are talking about, normally, when we are talking about regional cooperation or transboundary cooperation, we immediately think about the cooperation at the national level, between the national governments. But I would like to highlight here in my presentation why local to local cooperation, even the local government line agencies at the local level, like cross-border, I would rather say, is very important when we are talking about and when we are looking at disaster governance. Okay. Okay, so ICIMOD normally works at the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. As you can see here, we work in 8 different countries: Afghanistan, Bhutan, Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar, Nepal, and Pakistan. And it is also the source of 10 different river basins in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. And it is a hotspot of biodiversity, and it's also known as the third pole. But the mountain environment in the HKH, the mountain people in the HKH are living in a multi-hazard environment. That means we are impacted by storm, earthquake, flood, drought, landslide, extreme temperatures, wildfire, and many more other disasters hazards that occur in our region. On average, one of the studies shows that there are more than 36,000 people killed and 178 million affected each year due to natural disasters in this region. And also, when you look at the disaster statistics, then we will see in this 8 different countries in the region, average of 76 disaster events occur every year. If you look at the decadal data, then we can see that every decade the disaster events are increasing, and also the economic losses accordingly are increasing, and then the people killed accordingly are increasing. So this is, in a way, multi-hazard environment we are living in, which is making us more prone to disasters. But when we zoom into the disasters, different type of disasters, then in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region is one of the region where the flood disasters are more impactful, and the frequency, if you can see here in the map, the frequency and the people impacted in our region are more. So floods and flash floods are one of the major disasters that occur in this region. And accordingly, it has multiple impacts and cascading impacts, also leading to landslides and other issues. But when we are talking about all these disasters, we have to understand that it is the communities who are the first responders to these disasters, because whenever disaster occurs, it hits the communities first. And within the communities also, when we disaggregate the data, then we have to think it's not the community in a blanket approach, but it's more of women and children, elderly, and the disabled people are more impacted than men. The study shows this, as we can see in this slide. And one of the study also said that the women's lack of information, mobility, decision-making power, and access to resources and training, as well as gender-based socio-cultural norms and barriers in this region, conventional gender responsibilities, and high rates of male out migration make them more vulnerable when disasters hit us in this region at the local level. But we also see that we are sending information, early warnings and all, and we do the modeling. We come out with graphs saying that, okay, here the water level is rising and all. But the key question is, are we really reaching the most vulnerable? That is the key question. Are we really sending the information? The information is really sent to those who really need on the ground. That is the major question that we have to ask. And this is where the disaster risk governance comes as plays a key role in all this sector. We already heard about Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, and the priority 2 completely talks about how we have to strengthen disaster governance to manage disaster risks. But when we are talking about governance on disaster, there could be multiple ways we can think about the governance. So it could be institutions, it could be policies, it could also be roles of actors and stakeholders that we are dealing with, and also the flow of information, especially when we are talking about sending the early information. So how does the information flow? So that also compasses within the disaster governance issues. And in order to strengthen the disaster governance, one of the Oxford Policy Management report in May 2020 talks about weak institutional mechanism and poor governance leads to increase of losses of life and property during disasters. But one of the recent study also showed that in South Asia, some progress has been seen, because this year, when the floods and landslides occurred in Nepal, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, in these areas, over 18 million people were affected, but only about 1,300 were dead and missing. So that means that the study concluded that maybe it is because the enhanced preparedness mechanisms are there, and it's mainly the early warning systems are in place. The recent publication, October 4th, from Joydeep Gupta also talks about early warning system and how it is saving lives and livelihood. So when we're talking about early warning, let me come to share some experience of ICIMOD on community-based flood early warning system. It is also a global award-winning project. I'm happy to share it here. And when we are talking about community-based early warning, it is mainly implemented in the river tributaries, not in the main rivers, but the tributary rivers. And it gives a very good upstream and downstream linkage. Almost real-time information is sent to the downstream vulnerable communities. It not only provides the information, but also guides on how to act on warnings and uses low ICT tools for dissemination of information. As we all know, I don't want to go in detail, 4 elements of early warning system: risk knowledge and scoping, community-based monitoring and early warning, dissemination, communication, response capability, and resilience. And in all the 4 steps, the governance mechanism is very important. And based on our experience, we have now also started working on the sustainability mechanism of early warning system. This is how you can see here the early warning information is disseminated to the local communities. As you can see here, level 1, level 2, and level 3 talks about level 1 is no action, level 2 is be prepared, and level 3 is to evacuate when you get this information. So, but in order to send this information to the local and the vulnerable communities, it is very important that the proper governance mechanism is in place. So when we are talking about governance mechanisms here in the early warning system at the community level, we are talking about some pre-established network of communication. For example, the source of information is the caretaker. Then the caretaker sends the information according to level 1, level 2, and X number of levels, and on that, it is the concerned are the district authorities, focal NGOs, downstream peoples, vulnerable communities, and so on. So proper mechanism and needs to be institutionalized when we are talking about the early warning system and the information dissemination. This is one of the example of the communication channel in Ratu. And when we are doing the scoping, the first stage of early warning system, so we come out with this very proper institutional, this mechanism to share the information from the caretaker, from Ratu is a cross-border river. So in Nepal, goes to India across the border, but also to the government line agencies at the local level, the district disaster management authorities, the army, police, force, and all those things, and then to the vulnerable communities, so that it's a proper mechanism is established for the early warning system. So, but nowadays we are also blessed with the internet. So in 2019, we also managed to have the WhatsApp group, so that the information is more easily sent to the downstream communities in the group. And the beauty of this is we can also share the photographs and the information to the downstream communities so that they can be prepared of. So one of the other important role in the governance mechanism is of media house and the journalists. That's where, when we're talking about awareness raising, sharing the information to the communities and the right information in the right time is very important when we are talking about disseminating the information and sending it to the people, to the local communities. So ICIMOD has worked in 4 different countries. In Afghanistan, we were able to work with His Excellency and the team Disaster Management Authority, but also in Pakistan, Nepal, India. So we have established this early warning system. And I would like to share some of the learnings from the early warning system and how governance mechanism is important. So in September, as you can see here, in 2013 in Jadal River Dhimaji district, first early warning system that we installed from ICIMOD, there was a huge flood, and in Dihiri, the information was sent to the Dhimaji Disaster Risk Management Authority even before the government system provided the information. That's how they were able to send the rescue team and were able to save almost $3,300 equivalent livestock and assets. And this is, here you can see the letter of appreciation from the government disaster management authority for the work that we have done. So the next is, I would like to go on the Pakistan Sher Killa case. On the 3rd of August 2017, there was a huge flood that came early in the morning, but people were able to evacuate because our system provided them 1 hour early information, the lead time that they were able to save lives and livestock. So early in the morning at 5:30 a.m. the flood came, but 4:30 a.m. they were already alerted. And with many other instruments installed in Gilgit-Baltistan, Pakistan, we were able to hand over the system and the entire network to the GB Government Disaster Management Authority in July 2019, who is now taking care of it for the upscaling and outscaling of the system. In the case of Ratu is the cross-border and very interesting is on 12th August 2017, there was a huge flood, as you can see here, flood in Lalgarh in upstream in Nepal. And then the result you see in Bittamur in Bihar, India, the flood situation here. But then people were able to be safe, go in the safe shelter, and they were also able to save their livestock. It was because of the early warning system that from Nepal, from the border of Nepal, which provided almost 8 hours of lead time for the people in Bittamur for their preparedness and save lives and livelihood. This was also linked with, the information that was provided from the Nepal government, Department of Hydrology and Meteorology. They produce flood bulletins, and we were able to give the early information to the caretakers of this information system almost 2 days before that to be prepared. That's how it is also linked with the national system, so it helped them to prepare at the local level. And with the success of Ratu River, we have been approached by the downstream in India in other 2 rivers, as you can see, the Gagan River and the Khado River, both flowing from Nepal going to Bihar in India. And we included the communities in our communication channel. And in 2019, July flood, they were able to get the information successfully. In India also. So you can see the cross-border linkage that we are providing. But in the Khado River, it's here, in the Khado River, one of the other good example of the governance mechanism is also that in the downstream, the Tilati Koilati Rural Municipality, Rajbiras Municipality, Rupani Municipality, and also the local cooperative in Nepal, they came out with the concept of basket fund, for the sustainability of the system and the work that they are doing. And then it helped them to share the information and continue the work. They were able to gather almost 11 lakhs of Nepali rupees, so for the sustainability of the project. So it is even after the phasing out of the project. So this is at the local level how the rural municipalities themselves demanded the early warning system, and then prepared a proper governance mechanism to share information not only in Nepal but also cross-border in India. But also when we are talking about disaster governance, the networks at various levels are very important. One of the network that ICIMOD is working in Koshi Basin is the Koshi Disaster Risk Reduction Network Hub, KDKH we call it. And this is a platform in Bihar where you can see that we have brought together the local communities, the district disaster management authorities, the local government line agencies, and also the national authority coming together, sitting on, and also, of course, the communities sitting together on the same platform and discussing about the regional cooperation, the transboundary, and also more importantly, at the local level, community level, how the social networks, you know, the informal sector institutions, not only the formal sector, but also the informal sector institutions, your friends, the social networks are also very important when we are talking about the governance mechanism in disaster. Now, this is a very critical situation that we are facing, COVID-19 pandemic. And we would say that it's double trouble for us, you know. And then we have to be prepared, not only for the flood, but in this context with the COVID problem also, and managing the physical distance, you know, wearing mask, washing hands when clean water is such a problem during the flood season. That is an extra additional work that we have to do, and we have to be very careful while working on it. And in a way, this might be the right time when we can look at the disaster governance mechanism and see where we can make changes, how we can improvise it. Some take-home messages, this is my last slide, is from our learnings, the work that we have done in ICIMOD with our partner organizations and the government line agencies and local communities, we realize that good institutional mechanism, whether it be formal or informal, should be in place, and the ownership at the local level is very important. As my slide I mentioned, when disaster hits, it's the communities that is more first impacted. Then clarity in roles and responsibilities, especially when we are talking about different levels of government, central, provincial, local, but also other actors. Good coordination and integration of different sectoral departments when we are talking about multi-hazard environment is important in effective governance, but also exploring opportunities for a positive way forward to ensure accountability and efficiency at the local government level. And in order to do so, enhancing the awareness and information dissemination, but also building institutional capacities of various stakeholders at different levels are very important. And as we also mentioned, you know, sufficient budget allocation is important. At the local level now that in case of Nepal and others also, like now it is decentralized, and at the local level, the local government have budget for disaster management, but it is mainly for the response activities post-disaster. But it is important from our learnings, it is important that prevention and preparedness budget needs to be there so that prevention is better than cure, as we say. The seventh point I would like to raise is the voice of marginalized and vulnerable community groups in decision-making process is very important. And then lastly, to ensure that the implementation of disaster risk reduction policies through effective governance to reduce disaster risks and enhance coping, especially now in the COVID pandemic situation, because we know that there are, the policies are there, but implementation is a problem because of poor governance mechanisms. So strengthening the governance mechanism is very important. Thank you so much. With this, I would hand over to you, Pankaj.
Thank you, Dr. Neera. Very, very insightful presentation. Again, I will just take a minute to try and recap some of the things from my own perspective. Very, very important points made about the governance and institutional mechanisms and why they should be robust. But equally important, what I understood from your presentation was that why do we need a very robust governance and institutional mechanism? Because, you know, we need to also understand that when the disaster strikes, it actually disproportionately affects people who may not have a voice, women, girls, or physically challenged people. And therefore, the governance and institutional framework must take into account the voices from different parts of the society, more particularly those who have no voice or do not have a reach to the policy makers. You very well identified the importance of priority 2 in the Sendai framework, and therefore that can be a guiding principle for a strengthened institutional and governance mechanism. I like the way in the challenge that you have thrown to all of us, and indeed including those who are not there in this webinar, is are we really reaching out to the most vulnerable people? And that can only happen when our governance and institutional framework will take into consideration the special needs of the sections of society who sometimes get obliterated in our minds. And through various example, for example, the Ratu River example, or Jindal River example, which is from Dhimaji in Assam, or from Gilgit-Baltistan, Khando River example, the Kosi example. These various examples are examples which actually are buttressing the argument that Professor Sharma was making in the beginning, that indeed we have come a long way from a period when there was very little or no regional cooperation to a situation where cooperation is happening. But it also gives a sense that cooperation, increasing the cooperation or enhancing the cooperation, is indeed a process and not an event, and therefore a lot of good examples are there, and we can build on those examples to further deepen cooperation. But it also highlights the pivotal role played by ICIMOD in terms of fostering cooperation in the region. And these are examples from different countries, and examples are brilliant examples. I must also say that I have myself been a very strong votary of media linkage or media engagement or media interface, whatever you call it, and that needs to deepen, because media plays a very important role of being a public educator and a disseminator of information. And it has come out very, very clear and beautifully in your presentation. So I think thank you so much for this incisive presentation, Dr. Neera. Can I now request Professor Daanish Mustafa to speak on his topic of hazardscapes in South Asia, culture, commonalities, and cooperation. The floor is all yours, Professor Daanish.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this very distinguished panel. I'm particularly grateful to Shobits for taking the trouble to invite me. I think a lot of my thunder has been stolen by the preceding distinguished speakers. A lot of things that I was going to talk about, they've already talked about. So let's see what I can pull out of my hat under these circumstances. I just have a few points that I'd like to make. First is that this whole idea of disaster risk reduction, I think it would be useful for us to have a wee bit of a historical perspective on it. DRR sort of really emerged thanks to the on the developmental agenda in after 2005 Boxing Day tsunami, and a lot of international donors started talking about disaster risk reduction and like, oh my God, this is really interesting, and it became sort of the fashionable kind of buzzword in the development circles. And we in academia were like, well, wait a minute, what's going on? For the past 40 years, we've been talking about vulnerability reduction, uneven effect of disasters on different populations by virtue of race, ethnicity, culture, gender, class, and so on and so forth. And now all of that 40 years of work has been taken over by disaster risk reduction. So it was basically sour grapes for us, but in any case, there's a very strong corpus of knowledge talking about how precisely to tackle these questions of disaster risk reduction. The bigger issue is what is the linkage between what is being said in academia in terms of the theoretical knowledge and what's actually happening on the ground. And that's where my interest in the whole concept of hazardscape kind of comes into the picture. What do I say a hazardscape is? One of the things that had always struck me working in South Asia was that I'd go and talk to these farmers or indigenous people who were not formally educated, and I'd ask, so on average, how much productivity do you get? Or on average, what your income might be? And most people just look at me and I think someone's mic is on, so they may want to mute that. Hello? Hello? Hi. Okay, shall I keep going?
Sorry, Daanish. Yeah, please.
No problem. No problem. Okay, so yeah, so I was saying that I was struck by the fact that most of these not formally educated people would have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about when I'm talking about average, normal, the concept of average and concept of normal. And it kind of a bit of a penny dropped in my head that for most indigenous local idioms, local people, the concern is not about what is normal, but what is extreme. And humanity, for most of its existence, and part of the reason why we are such a successful species, is because we've always thought about what is the worst that can happen tomorrow or the day after or the next month or this year. And what do I have to do to make sure that I'm standing if that worst were to come to pass? And when I contrasted that with the sort of a modern attitude towards disasters and hazards, the modern life is essentially predicated upon a normal view of the world. What is it that I have to do today, tomorrow, day after, next month, next year, and so on and so forth, so as to maximize my return? If average conditions were to continue into the future, what is it that I have to do to maximize my return? Now, you can see that the local indigenous human idiom of life or model of life is of extremes. How do we plan inwards from extremes? Whereas the so-called Western model of life or paradigm of life is about what is it that I have to plan outwards from the mean, if you will. Hence the idea of hazardscape. The notion is that it comes from the landscape idea, where the notion is that we have to recenter the concept of hazards, the hazardousness of life, as a central planning and cultural framework for living life. What does that mean? I mean, that sounds pretty depressing, doesn't it? Like, oh my God, oh, life is hazardous, bad things happen. But turns out some of the greatest religious traditions in the world, in fact, would tell you that life is, for example, in the Buddhist thought, that life is dukkha, life is suffering. Now, you would think that the Buddhist people are probably the most depressing people in the world because they think life is dukkha, that's the elementary insight of life, but turns out that that's not the case. Most societies, most cultures that talk about the hazardousness of life are not depressing people, they're simply acknowledging the reality of life. Why am I going into this stratospheric kinds of contemplation? The reason I'm doing that is that the basic insight about how we approach disasters, hazards, is already there. It surrounds us. It's everywhere. The problem is that our modern education and modern frameworks do not allow us to see those. And that's where, Shobit, may I ask you to put up that photograph that I shared with you?
Just a second.
Yeah, so this is a photograph that Shobit is just going to put up presently. I was in Chitral about 2 weeks ago, which is across the border from the Wakhan corridor. And this was in a Kalasha village. Kalasha are these indigenous people who live just across from Nuristan in Afghanistan. His Excellency Haidari would be familiar with that. And this is a street view photograph that I took. And I put up this photograph, and my friend who's the head of NDMA in Nepal, he said, "Oh my God, this is such wonderful architecture of earthquake proofing, where basically these pins that are interspersed with these stone masonry buildings, they're some of the finest examples of earthquake resistant manufacturing, earthquake resistance housing construction." Now, this is a traditional kind of a house, and just about 100 meters from where these houses are, you see these government buildings, nasty, ugly, unspeakably ugly concrete structures, which would crash with their heavy concrete roofs on your head the moment the earth shakes even a little bit. People may recall the Kashmir earthquake of 2005, about 73,000 people died in Pakistan. And the reason was that the whole revolution of concrete which came to be equated with modernity, which came to be equated with progressiveness. I remember when I was a child, my grandparents used to live in Muzaffarabad, and I'd go there, and we used to have a thatched roof. And it was a wonderful thing because the thatched roof had to be plastered with mud every summer in order for it to sustain. And us kids just absolutely used to love it because we'd get to jump in the mud and get our clothes dirty, and I think parents would yell at us and what have you. And then I distinctly remember at some point my grandparents had a concrete roof, had that thatched roof replaced with the concrete roof. And they were so proud that, oh my God, look at this, we have become modern. Well, it turns out that very same roof came down on their heads in 2005, and one of my cousins passed away as a result of that. And there you have the example of a non-hazardous kind of a view, looking for modernity, looking for progress, looking for basically stupid things to do within the environment that you live in order to pretend like you have really become modern. Why am I giving all of this long sort of a story? The reason I'm saying that is that the hazardscape is essentially a concept which invites you to look at the disconnect between the expert view of hazards and the lived reality of hazards. We have dime a dozen experts in Pakistan. I have been to many, many conferences where everybody is an expert on disasters and hazards. And what I find is a remarkable regularity in the sorts of conversations that take place, which is all very well. They've got some very good ideas. But very rarely do I find that it is not so much that the expert who has to teach the local people as to what to do in order to in order to protect themselves from disaster, hazards, environmental extremes. But almost never is the equation turned the other way around. That perhaps we need to tap into the local knowledge, the indigenous knowledge, and particularly gendered knowledge, if you will, to sort of try and think that how have these humans made their peace within the environments that they live in. And hazards and environmental extremes are in fact the most normal, typical instances of human-environment relations. It is not news to people living in northern Afghanistan or northern Pakistan that earthquakes happen. It is not news to them that avalanches happen. It is not a shocking revelation to them that flash floods are going to happen. This is what they have lived with for millennia on end, and they have adapted to them. What have we done to learn from them, if you will? And that's the sort of a disconnect that I find very troubling. The other one is that the states, nation states, the formal institutions of disaster management in South Asia, modeled after the colonial administrations, colonial states, they take a very compartmentalized view of hazards. Oh, here's an institution, Federal Flood Commission of Pakistan does floods. Geological Survey of Pakistan does earthquakes. Some other revenue department deals with drought. Whereas the actual experience of hazards is in fact of cascading hazards. It's never about a single hazard, never. And people find it very difficult. I mean, I worked in Rawalpindi, Islamabad, and I said, oh, what is your view about floods? And almost 90% of the women said to us, we like floods, to be honest with you. I mean, yes, the headlines are about floods, people got swept away, property damage happened. I said, we kind of really like floods because for the rest of the year, we're basically living by a stream that is a sewer and as well as a solid waste dump. And our children are sick perpetually. It's horrible, horrible, way to live. And that's true of practically all of South Asia, urban South Asia, that the urban streams become sewage dumps and toxic waste dumps. And what the floods do is clean it up. We like it. What we are really worried about is solid waste, liquid waste, pollution, all the sort of social dysfunctionality that come with it. So it's a multi-layered sort of a reality that they are living. There were floods in Karachi about a couple of months back, and 73 people died. 54 of them, almost none of them died of drowning in the flood. 54 of them died of electrocution. So what is the hazard there? Similarly, in rural South Asia, you almost never find people actually being swept away by the flood wave. In fact, almost very large proportion of them, if they are fatalities, often fatalities happen because of snake bites, because people climb up the trees, the people get up to higher grounds, and snakes figure it's a good idea to get away from that, and they get bitten by snakes. Well, the question then becomes, in a disaster risk reduction format, do you really need lots of boats? Or perhaps you may also want to think about anti-venom in a rural environment, or in an urban environment, you probably want to think about what is the state of the electricity infrastructure so that people don't get electrocuted. So these are the sorts of linkages which a hazardscape view, and talking and tuning in and opening up your ears to listen to the local experiences of hazards can actually have you more effective means of undertaking disaster risk reduction. And unfortunately, the South Asian states and formal policy networks have been replicating again over and over again that sort of a very compartmentalized, scientized, technocratic view of the world. So if you're looking for disaster risk reduction, the answer is there in front of you. People who suffer them, people who are at the receiving end of them, know best. Talk to them. And that's one thing that I do not see as much happening either in South Asia or in most other parts of the world where I've worked. I'm done. I think I'm on time.
Thank you, Professor Danish. Some really insightful and also provocative in terms of making people think about the models which are extremely expert-driven models. I just want to say that I, as a student of sociology, I do recognize the point that you were making about how the understanding about hazards in human life are completely intertwined with the understanding of the culture, and the culture and coping mechanisms also being completely intertwined. And therefore, I have seen a lot of people in India trying to learn and understand what are the traditional coping mechanisms of certain communities who face flood year after year after year, and how they have learned to live with floods. Also, the point that you made about the abundance of local knowledge, and I think it is time that we also tap into that knowledge, which is actually what we call is the knowledge which is handed down from generation to generation, because that's culture is always handed down from generation to generation. And the profound, in a way, I will say, the photograph that you showed from Chitral about the housing which are earthquake proof housing, a lot to learn. And yes, I do understand that there are many people who do recognize the point of view of appreciating and learning from traditional knowledge. So I think basically it is time that we, when we talk about cooperation, we should also highlight the point that we need to have respect for and the spirit of taking into account the traditional knowledge of people. Absolutely well made points. Thank you so much for.
Thank
For
you.
those who have joined in late, I just want to say that Professor Daanish Mustafa is a professor in critical geography in King's College London in UK, and has done a lot of work relating to hazards in Pakistan. Can I now begin to move towards a set of questions that I have in mind, and more particularly after your presentations? Uh, can I would like to begin with Professor Vinod Sharma, because he was the first speaker, and therefore there are some questions. So, Professor Vinod Sharma, are you able to hear us, sir? Can you hear me all right, sir?
Yes, yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
I can hear you,
Professor
Pankaj.
Sharma, okay, thank you, sir. Uh, uh, Professor Sharma, your contribution in the field of disaster management is very well and widely known in India and in the region as well. So you played a key role in establishing an organization which is now known as NIDM, National Institute of Disaster Management. And you are also the vice chairman of Sikkim State Disaster Management Authority. You have represented Indian government on various regional and global platforms. Um, so in South Asia, we know that it would not be entirely incorrect to say that the mechanisms for regional cooperation could be more robust than what we see today. And you have plotted the evolution of regional cooperation. Additionally, it is a fact that disasters are not bound by administrative boundaries. So, being in Sikkim, a state which is surrounded by three different countries, you must definitely be advocating for improved bilateral or multilateral cooperation between the countries on disaster governance. If I may ask you, sir, in the background of what I just said, in your opinion, what would be the key drivers of effective regional cooperation in South Asia?
Thank you very much, Pankaj. And I think I will first give the example of Sikkim, and then I will come to another question. I will say that Sikkim, as you know, that very small state in the eastern Himalaya, and you might be knowing that only 4 districts, very small population, 600,000, organic state, people are very much environment friendly. The different type of governance, in case you allow me, I will say that it's one of the example of good governance also. People's participation, because if you see panchayats in Sikkim, they are very strong. And then I'm working there, since last 8 years. And I really enjoyed, working with these people, because they understand that how important is, first of all, working together. We have 4 districts, so how the 4 districts should work together. Then how we should work with West Bengal and with the, adjoining state. Then how it is important with working with Bhutan and Nepal, and because China, because our 3 countries are around this state. I will give you one example that we have more than 300 glaciers in Sikkim, and about 5-6 years ago, ISRO gave us information that the Lonach Glacier, it is receding. All the glaciers are receding there, but Lonach Lake, the volume has increased more than 8 times. And any time there can be a Gulf-like situation, and there may be outburst. And then, as you know, that we have many hydroelectric power plants and all that. So we immediately started working on it. We don't have any expertise. So we consulted people, from the region, and from ICIMOD and from other organizations, and we find that there is hardly any expertise in the region. We could, I mean, and I fully, you know, uh, I accept, the idea of Professor Daanish that the local knowledge we always ignore. We consulted, Sonam Wangchu from Leh, Ladakh, and he gave us idea that the only solution for this is that you should have, siphon this water into Tista river. So he gave us blueprint. We requested him to help us, and you believe me that with the help of this local knowledge of people, because he was doing similar work in Leh Ladakh, and he was conserving this water in form of ice stupa and all that. So he gave us the same idea that instead of that, you siphon this water into this river, and then at least the outflow will not be there. You believe me that you can 12,000 feet height, and how to take pipes and all that, it was a Herculean task, but we could do it, and ultimately we could mitigate that disaster. We hold a workshop in which we invited people from Nepal, from ICIMOD, from Bhutan, from all the countries, and we explain them that how we could mitigate this disaster, which is very common, which can be very common in Himalayas. And you believe me that after that the cooperation started. The Bhutan government invited our officers, and we hold series of workshop in all the northeastern states, and we sensitize people that look, this is one disaster which has already happened in Kedarnath, but it can happen in any of the states. And there was a very good result, I should say, that in case you sensitize people, your adjoining country, of course, it is a big challenge. They are a sovereign country, they may not listen to you. But I think if we are not teaching them, if we are just sharing our what we have done, I think people will be very receptive. Your approach is important. That if your approach is that you want to teach people that look, we are the expert and we have done this thing, and I think then hardly anybody will come. But in case the approach is that we want to share our experiences, that how we have had this mitigation program, then people are very receptive. And this is one thing, one learning from this experiment of Lonach in Sikkim. Then you very rightly said that it's not easy, because and as I told you in the beginning, it need investment. I will give you one more example. In Philippines, 3% of the national income, they are spending on DRR. 3%, which is, I think, the only country, in the region which is spending this much. So unless and until you have that kind of commitment, unless and until you have, now like India, you have mitigation fund, and this mitigation fund is available, at national level, as well as they are asking states, to have similar funds, and they are asking states to give the projects. So I think investment, this is very important. And when we have commitment, then definitely people would like to, invest, and it will give very good dividend. I mean,
Th th th
how you can we manage, disaster during COVID. Now you can see that how many disasters in this 5-6 months, and so I think there are many things which are there, which will come in the regional cooperation, and there should be a proper documentation that how the region dealt with this situation and the complex emergencies, which happened during this subject become important, and your over to you, Pankaj.
Thank you, sir. We momentarily lost you last 5-7 seconds, but we nevertheless got the sense of the entire argument that you made. Thank you so much. The participants are aware that His Excellency Mr. Haidari, the Deputy Minister for Disaster Management and Humanitarian Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, is on the panel, and we are very fortunate to have you here, sir. If I may ask you, Mr. Minister, sir, as to what opportunities do you see where India and Pakistan can come together to mutually support each other in enhancing the collective capacities in disaster governance? Uh, if you can shed some light on some thoughts.
Hello.
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 Yes, sir. We can hear you, sir. His Excellency, Mr. Haidari, can you hear us, sir? There seems to be a problem. Professor Sharma, if I can come back to you and say more generally, if there has to be a deeper collaboration or cooperation between India and Afghanistan, for example, um, what can be done? More generally, top of your mind, some ideas.
I think it's a good question, and Afghanistan was very, because we had number of disasters in India, and from 91 Uttarkashi, 93 Ratu, we had super cyclone, and last earthquake. So after that, Afghanistan, which is also having series of natural calamities, they ask, us to prepare their national plan and state level plans. So we help them. And you might be knowing that Seeds India and many organizations were involved in making the national plan and the district level plans and vulnerability atlas, etc., for the Afghanistan. And then IIT, Indian Institute of Public we our ambassador, he was very generous. Afghanistan on basically for zonal governors, for district governors of Afghanistan, and it was a very good learning exercise for me. And in each and every program, we learned a lot about their issues, and then in every trip, we were taking them to one state, and we were showing them that what we are doing in disaster risk reduction, in environmental management, all these different issues, because the program was not only on disaster management, it was on development and DRR. So I think that was a very good experience. And Afghanistan is very receptive, and the officers, they want to learn from our experiences, because we have similar situation. And at district level, at sub-district level, I think some of the case studies which we can present to them, they can be useful. And there are 2-3 things which we can do. One is that we can work with them, in community level, community-based, risk reduction. I think that is important, and we have expertise in this. We, in this webinar, you have Dr. Bhanu and all these people. They have worked with the community, since long time, and this expertise can be shared, with Afghanistan. And so I think this is one, that community-based. Second thing is that the coordination between government and the civil society and the community, I think that is also a very important thing which they can learn from Indian experience. And I think this, uh, you know, exchange of expertise, exchange of people, and exchange of knowledge, that is required, which can be there through institutional mechanism. They have the institute for civil service officers. They have different arrangement. They have very good NGOs. So I think we can develop a sort of mechanism and work with them on some identified issues. They also have some good expertise, so that can also be documented. They have not documented it properly, but their work is very important. So this is my initial thought, because I am also working with Afghanistan since last 10 years, and it is a good experience for me. I visited Kabul, I visited some of the areas, and I understand their situation. But it is I'm glad that the leadership there, they are very sensitive about disaster risk reduction, and they are signatory to Sindai framework. They understand their responsibility, and this you can see from the statement of excellency. So
Yes.
with this, I hand over to you, Pankaj.
I am a bit skeptical if His Excellency is able to hear me now. Uh, His Excellency, can you hear me?
Pankaj, I think he has left
Oh, he's left. Okay.
There's some, yeah. There should be some
Okay.
technical.
Well, Professor Daanish Mustafa, I'll come to you after Neera. And I would request you to explain one, answer my question, but also explain and break down the idea of interoperability. But before that, I just want to ask Dr. Neera Pradhan. Neera ji, ICIMOD has made a significant contribution to DRR, both in terms of delivering and the discourse in the Himalayan region, with your work is spreading across Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bhutan. With your experience of working with different stakeholders in these countries, and with your advantage of engaging with both the community and the governments, how do you see that multi-layered cooperation can be improved in South Asia? And if it has to be done and done well, then who has the authority and the mandate to lead the way? Is it SARC or the intergovernmental organization like ICIMOD or civil society groups, or does it have to be a collective initiative?
Thank you so much, Pankaj, for this very important question. As you have mentioned, yes, ICIMOD has been working in the at the regional level, and my experience, especially working with the community as well as the government, and also to some extent at the regional level, the multi-stakeholder, this multi-layered cooperation is very important for disaster governance, So when we are talking about governance, as I mentioned in my presentation also, the stakeholders are also important, and the role of stakeholders are important. We can sometimes see that the communities and the governments are working in silo, and that could be one of the issue, because in disaster governance and disaster risk management, it is very important that there should be a supportive interface between the government and the communities. In other way, we can see that things are happening top-down approach also, and sometimes bottom-down approach also. But it should not go in silos. It should not have not an unsupportive interface. It should always have supportive interface where it meets. And that meeting point is where the improvement can be done. For example, I talked about CB Fuse, and in Ratu, we gave information that came out from DHM, Department of Hydrology and Meteorology, Government of Nepal, the flood bulletin from the flood bulletin almost 2 days before. They said that these tributaries are risky, and flood might come in 2 days' time. So that was 2 days before forecast, and that helped the communities, that helped the caretakers to prepare themselves, And when the flood really came, then they had almost 8 hours of lead time that in India they were able to provide, and that helped a lot for preparedness. That is in a way top down, but also bottom up. Now we are working with like-minded organizations like Oxfam also in Nepal, but also Save the Children, Lutheran World Relief, Practical Action, and other organizations trying to, those who are doing the community-based or the flood early warning system at the community level, trying to see how we can link it with the national government, the Department of Hydrology and Meteorology. And that's where we are trying to link the information that is coming out from this community-based early warning systems, link it in the DHM websites where people can access. Because the 2017 flood example, which I gave, was a very good example where it was not in the main river that the flood came. It was from the Shivalik, the range that the flood started, and the tributaries were first impacted. And that's where our system, which was on the tributary, the community-based early warning system, helped a lot to save people's life and livelihood. So there should be a supportive interface, not work in silos, So even though it is in multi-layered, we sometimes see that the multi-layer is working at the horizontal level, but it's not only horizontal, it should be vertical also, from communities to government and government to community, but also at the higher, the regional level, how we can do that. And now, in order to do that, coming to your second question on who has the authority and the mandate to lead, I would say that, projects comes and goes, and for the sustainability of the project, it is always the government who has to be in the driver's seat, but also the local communities, because they are the ones who suffer the most, And then the project or other organizations, like the civil society organizations, national organizations, international or intergovernmental organization like ICIMOD, or even the private sectors are important, individuals, experts, youth, very important in our early warning system and, disaster management, but also talking about academia, scientists, and different networks should come together so that we can provide scientific backstopping or evidence-based knowledge to the government and the local communities so that they can drive the way and take the lead. So that is how I think that, but also talking about the regional networks, yes, you correctly mentioned about SARC. We have the SARC Disaster Center, but really need to do the reality check how much it is working. And it is very important for all the stakeholders, like I've mentioned earlier, to support and bring it together, because that is a platform where we can come together at a regional level and support each other. But also I can see, ADPC is also working very well. ICIMOD is rightly placed. It's an intergovernmental organization, and it is rightly placed, when we are talking about different networks, like we have Koshi Disaster Network, KDKH, hub. And we also have the Upper Indus Basin Network, UIB network, working in 4 different countries: China, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. KDKH working in China, Nepal, and India, where we can bring different layers of stakeholders together and initiate the dialogue in a scientific manner with evidence-based knowledge, and setting aside, political issues and all those things, but come out with science and evidence. And that was really appreciated by the network members, because they felt that this is a platform where we can share knowledge and learn from each other. And also we have conducted exchange visits, like, for example, when we started CBFUs in Afghanistan, they went to India and saw how it is working in Assam. When we started the work in Pakistan, they came to Nepal and looked at the Ratu work. So it is also, this is the beauty of working with multi-stakeholder platform, and the multi-layered cooperation can come here. I think that's why it is important, the multi-layered cooperation, but the driving seat should be who is impacted the most and who is in the longer run can make it sustainable. So at this moment, this much, Pankaj. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Neera Pradhan. I just want to say that I had deliberately kept the scope of collaboration slightly narrow, but you've expanded, and I think rightfully so, and very well put. I'm coming now to Professor Mustafa. Professor Mustafa, if you can tell us a little bit about the idea of interoperability. This is quite a tongue twister, this word, and also if you can also tell us a little bit about how can actually countries come together and improve the idea of interoperability when it comes to disaster governance in our region.
Actually, before I answer your question, I have to Google interoperability to make sure that I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Exchange and make use of interoperability of military equipment. Okay, fine, got it. I just wanted to be sure what you meant by it.
Yeah.
I think countries of South Asia share a set of very common challenges.
Right.
I think amongst those challenges is that South Asia is probably one of the fastest urbanizing regions in the world, right? Second important challenge is that South Asia, unfortunately, has bought into the North American model of urbanization, which is an automobile-dependent urban sprawl model of urbanization. When I used to fly into Kathmandu from 2006 was the first time I went to Kathmandu. There was on one side of the city was the airport, and then there was the ring road, and then there was a considerable amount of empty space between Kathmandu, Lalitpur, Kathmandu, and Bhaktapur. And today, if you climb up on Kathmandu and you look down, practically the entire valley is filled up, and it's filled up by the expatriate money and those square grid pattern kind of urban sprawl. It's the same story that is being repeated around Delhi and Mumbai and Lahore and Karachi and Islamabad and so on and so forth. Now, just talking about interoperability, the remarkable thing is that when it comes to doing stupid things, all the countries seem to mimic each other very, very well. When you're talking about blocking natural drainage of streams, all the countries seem to do a remarkable job of doing exactly the same thing as the other countries do. But when it comes to preventing those sorts of unfortunate management decisions, planning decisions, and so on, turns out that they can't do that. So I think the question of interoperability in the first instance has to be grounded in the understanding of disaster risk reduction as an inherently political enterprise. What are the politics of, for example, real estate development in South Asia, if one is talking about urban hazards or urban disaster risk reduction? And once you ask that question, suddenly in Technicolor, a whole set of answers and responses immediately present themselves. That this is why the kind of development in Kathmandu Valley, which is enhancing the vulnerability of the people, or in Lahore, is happening. So I would suggest that the basic concept in which interoperability has to be grounded, perhaps, is the notion of the political nature of disaster risk reduction. What are the people whose power interests are being catered to through the kind of non-resilient development that is taking place in each one of these places? So that's, I think, my sort of 2 cents that I have that I could contribute to the concept of interoperability.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
No. Please go on. Please go on.
I was also going to say, I was very grateful to ICIMOD. I have some friends there, and they asked me once, can you do some gender-based early warning system? I was like, oh God, why do you want to put gender into everything? I was not very sort of sensitive to that. So I said, fine, since you're a friend, I'll do it for you. Let me look into it. Let me do some research. And once I researched, I found, my God, Daanish, you're such an idiot. How could you not possibly recognize the whole concept of early warning is an inherently gendered enterprise? Turns out that in Pakistan, as I'm sure in many other parts of the world, men tend to have a much greater command of the national language. Women less so, because they tend to be, particularly in rural parts of South Asia, women tend to have more of a command over the local languages rather than the national language. So I'm sure in India, in northern India, men are more likely to speak and understand Hindi than women are likely to be because of the access to education and so on and so forth. And in Pakistan, similarly, women are much more likely to have a command over Pashto than they do over Urdu. Now, I was talking to Assistant Commissioner Badeen. He said that he got a message from a warning message from the Pakistan Meteorological Department in 2011, saying that there is a 80% chance of 400 millimeters of rain happening in the next 48 hours in Badeen. There are a lot of disaster risk experts sitting over here in this particular company. I challenge one of them to tell me, what does that mean? I am trained in climatology, by the way, and meteorology. I don't know what it means. What does 400 millimeters of rain, 70% chance of it over the next 48 hours in a particular area means? It means something else in Cherrapunji in Assam, for example. It means something completely different in Jodhpur, and means something completely different in Rawalpindi. And in Badeen, how would you know what does it mean? It was the most catastrophic flood, by the way, that happened that year in 2011 in Badeen. And the Assistant Commissioner had no idea what to do, right? All of us listen to these early warning messages, through very sophisticated computer models and so on and so forth. I challenge one person to tell me, what do they mean when you listen to that news item? And then doubly so, that they are in English, not even in Hindi, or not in Nepali, not in Urdu. They're in English, but let's pretend that they do translate it into Urdu as well, because in Urdu or in Hindi or what have you, they do that. How many people understand that? And then you would put on the layer of women, children, people in remote areas. How do you convey that sort of a message that is understandable and actionable to people? Now, there is another sort of an interoperability issue where the emphasis and resources are so much going into building these fancy models, predictive models, putting down radars, putting down weather stations, putting down this, putting down that, which is important. No one's saying that it's not important. But how many of us are paying attention to saying, well, if I say this, would another person understand it? is the early warning. What does it matter? It's the most accurate forecast in the world if no one understands what the hell you're talking about, right? So there is another opportunity for the countries of South Asia and for the societies of South Asia to come together and say, this is nonsense. If you are in disaster risk reduction, we are not here to learn about how well you speak English, for example, because most of the times you must have seen in the official circles, when you're having a conversation, people are more concerned about making sure that you understand that they can speak English rather than actually making you understand what the heck are they saying, right? And that's the sort of, I think it's a task simultaneously of critique, it's simultaneously also a task of politics, of saying that this knowledge system, these knowledge claims need to be brought down from their pedestal and they need to be made relevant and real for the people who are suffering from disasters. I think that's the challenge.
Thank you, Professor Daanish. I just wanted to ask you, for those who are sitting in their own countries, they just want to picture Badin. If you can tell us all,
Badin is coastal.
Which province it is part of?
It's in Sindh. It's right next to Karachi.
Sindh.
It's coastal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it abuts Gujarat state in India.
Okay. Yeah, that's very helpful. To all the panelists, I will say that if you want to just make one point that you really want to make, you can do so before we actually open the floor for questions. And I guess there wouldn't be too many questions because I think I am absolutely clear that we need to end this discussion on time. So if any panelist wants to make something that might have come to your mind that you want to make.
Pankaj, I would like to say something, if you allow.
Please. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pankaj. And I would really like to thank Daanish for the points he put on the early warning system. You know, that is very much truly agreed, I think. And the participants here staying here will also so much agree to what you have said. So this much millimeter water coming, rainfall, you know. So that is the beauty of early warning system that I presented about the community based. So it does not talk about data. It talks about information, you know, information that is important for the communities. We always say they don't need, like, they don't want this much millimeter water going up or down. They just want water level is rising in the upstream of the river. Be careful, and then you save your life and property. You know, so that is the information that should go to the community level. And that's the beauty of the community-based flood early warning system. However, having said that, the scientific knowledge should also back up with this community knowledge. That is the interface also where I was talking about. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pradhan. Professor Sharma, you want to make one last point?
Pankaj, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Any point, any general point you want to make?
Yeah, just one or two things. One is about the challenge. I think the great challenge is that though we have started talking on Asian level, there is Asian Ministerial Conference, and you have seen, series of them. And I think it's a very good beginning. But at the same time, I think at political level, there is more sensitization required and more sensitivity, on this issue, because we understand that people realize that this is an important area and we should work together. But how to work? I think that steering committee that should be enhanced. So this is one challenge, which I am seeing. Say 2 or 3 suggestions, and one suggestion is that use of science and technology, innovation. I think this is very important. It is not only early warning, but I think now there are building, material, building techniques, the earthquake resistant feature. We are talking about resilient infrastructure, but I think that requires some knowledge. and that knowledge exists, in the region. Our IITs, our engineering institutions, I think we are all very capable. And in Nepal, in Bangladesh, I think there should be a regional cooperation of scientists where they can work together and disseminate this knowledge to the people. So this is second. And my third point, again, I will say that capacity building of all stakeholders. I'm not saying only government officials. I'm not saying only civil service, civil, society. I'm not saying only community. I think all these stakeholders are equally important, and that should be taken up. And I know that there are limited resources with the Southeast Asian countries, and there are other priorities, but I think it should be taken at priority level. And some of the last point is that I fully agree with the Professor Daanish that the local knowledge, the traditional wisdom which is existing in the region, we started working. In Nepal, there is a society, NSET. They started working on Himalaya and documenting, the local knowledge on Himalaya in, building types, building material, how they were surviving, after even some temples, which are existing even after so many earthquakes. So I think that documentation is required, that what is the traditional wisdom and how people were using it. So I think
Yes.
these are some of the points which can be taken as a base, and then we can work together. So I
Yes.
thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I think it is time for us to open the floor for the participants to ask questions. In the interest of time, while I would encourage you to ask questions, but I would suggest that we take 3, 4 questions and then see how it goes. And if we still have time, we can take more questions. So anybody can start. Just say that you want to ask a question and who your question is for, please. Or if you want to write your question, you can write your question and who you are asking your question to. Please go ahead.
Pankaj, can I ask a question?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you. So my question is, my question is to Dr. Sharma. And in his talk, initially he talked about the idea of ASEAN, where they talk about 10 countries, one response. So similarly, can we also be optimistic enough as SAARC as a region where we can also pursue a similar kind of goal, where few years down the line we also start responding collectively, and not only into response but also into uh, uh, risk reduction and resilience measures also we come as a collective unit. So if you can please respond to this.
Yeah, Animesh ji, it's a very good question, and I will say that the beginning was already made when this NDRF was formed in India, and NDRF is having similar training as the responders are having in Nepal, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in Philippines, in Indonesia, and you might be knowing that there was a peer program for enhancement of emergency response. So the basic training of medical first responders, collapse structure search and rescue, that was given to the responders. And all these 5, 6 Asian countries, earlier it was 5 when I was chief of party, but later on Pakistan was also added, and similar training was given to all 6 countries. The basic idea was that in case anything happened, we can work together. And I think there is a need to strengthen this kind of thing. We can give similar training to the our states, so that SDRF may be trained by the same mechanism. This training or some basic training may go to the community so that community is trained. And I think in SARC mandate, when we are saying SARC Disaster Management Center, in fact, when I set up the National Center for Disaster Management in 94, 95, I wrote this thing that one of the objective of this center will be capacity building of the SARC region. So I think you can imagine that I am having this dream that all the SARC countries, we should forget about political differences, but when we talk about natural disasters, we should be working together. And again, I am saying that we have lots of knowledge, we have lots of things to give to others. The only thing is that there is a need to have a will, and then we can work together. So I think the time will come that SARC will be much better than ASEAN. And ASEAN, I really appreciate that they have now one slogan, one ASEAN, one response. So I think maybe the time will come that we will forget our political differences and work together in disaster response, at least, not if not in preparedness, mitigation, etc. But in early warning, in response, I think we should work together, and this is the need of time.
Thank you, sir.
I can see that earlier Mr. Sahu from YSD, he wanted to ask a question. He was inquiring if he can ask a question. Mr.
Yes.
Sahu? Yeah,
Yes.
please ask your question.
Yeah. Thank you, Pankaj, and thank you, the panelists, for a wonderful deliberation on regional cooperation. But I have a very fundamental questions to Dr. Sharma, that we know that when we talk about disaster management, it basically the management, the word management is more of a top-down approach, which is very exclusive. There is hardly any transparency and accountability and citizen participation. But I mean, in course of time, we have seen that the disaster management word has been used. But if you look into the governance, in case of governance, you have very bottom-up approach, and where citizens and the people participation is very key, and there is more transparency and accountability in governance, and that is more of a right-based approach and more inclusive. So why the disaster or management word is basically using? Why we are not changing the nomenclature of management to governance? My second question is that about the financing of different governments in South Asia, particularly because we are more of we are facing more disaster events every year, almost all the countries in South Asia. So how much funding each government is allocating for disaster preparedness and mitigation? Is there any analysis has been done across South Asian countries, and what are the findings, if is there any? Thank you.
Sahuji, thank you very much for your two questions. And the answer of first question is that now the disaster management, it was a old word, and now we have shifted to disaster risk reduction. And what you are saying is correct, that people realize that it is not only government thing, but I think there are many stakeholders and community is also very important stakeholder, and their participation, their involvement is required. So I think the concept which was there in early, 20 years back or 30 years back, now it is shifting to risk reduction, understanding risk. And that's why the Sindai framework, we are talking about that this become a very important document. Your second question is that funding. I don't have data for the whole, Southeast Asia, but I can see about India that India in each finance commission, because after each 5 years we have finance commission, and they give the figure, for all states and for the whole country, that how much will be the money which will be provided for disaster response. But now we have two funds. We have disaster mitigation fund or national disaster response fund and national disaster mitigation fund, and this amount is much bigger, than we had earlier, because now we are talking about mitigation as well. So, and similarly other countries, they should have, so India is first country in South Asia which is I'm saying that first country in the sense that there is a name, national mitigation fund. They may be having mitigation in different uh, projects, but as National Disaster Mitigation Fund, this is the first country in South Asia which has set up a fund at national level and as well as state level. So I think there is a good beginning in South Asia, and that's why we are saying that it is learning from each other. In case we work together, then many good practices which is there in other countries we can adopt, and some of the good thing which is going on in India, Pakistan, Nepal, they can take from us. Thank you.
And one supplementary question, Dr. Sharma, is that can we have a common disaster governance fund across South Asia, and where each government can fund some amount of money to respond to any kind of disaster in this region? Is it possible? Apart from a cooperation, I think financing or funding for a common fund is a promise of the government to disaster preparedness, response, or mitigations. So can we have that one?
My answer is that we are talking about South Asia, but you take first SAARC countries, and the SAARC cooperation is not there, because as you can see that there is a SAARC office in Nepal, and there is a SAARC disaster management center in India, but still we are struggling because there is no proper financing, from the partner countries, and people feel that in case it is in India, then India should spend on this and that kind of approach. So I think this is a very big thing. Let us start cooperation from very small level, and then we can reach to a common force or common fund. That is a long story. I think we should make a
I
beginning.
think that and I think that Mr. Sahu's question is also, which is about disaster financing in the region, looks like also a subset of the larger concept of interoperability. If I understood his question right. Any other question for any other panelist? Mukunda, you have a question?
No, Pankaj, I actually was curious to know as how municipal governments at the border areas could actually ensure some kind of polycentricity uh, in terms of disaster governance, because no matter what happens at the central level, but at the provincial level, if things can work out and if cooperation can be achieved through some polycentric mechanism, I think that would be very helpful. But my question in this is, how can civil society like us can improve our own system of working as to work with these local governments, particularly say transboundary towns. I can give the example of say Pithoragarh. Of course, there is no adjacent town to Pithoragarh in Nepal, say Dharchula or Darchula. So how can this local administration and civil society work together to at least reduce the losses through cooperation? So my question is to, I think anybody can answer that. So
when you give the example of Darchula and Dharchula, I presume that you are asking this question of Dr. Neera Pradhan.
yes, but I think
Anyone can answer.
this question could be answered as what should be the way for us as how we can operate, because this has been also been a difficulty when it comes to implementing projects, particularly on the aspects of early warning. So that would be very helpful as a guidance.
Right. Neeraji, would you want to attempt answering
Yes,
this?
Pankaj, I think thank you very much for the question. It is a very important question, talking about local level cooperation at the local level. From our experience working at ICIMOD and in different transboundary or cross-border areas, 2 points I would like to put it here. The first thing is, from the very beginning, when we start the project or when we even conceptualize the project proposal, project concept, it is very important that we work together with the local government and the local communities, and the local partners, so that it is co-created. The concept is conceptualized together, and that's where the ownership comes. So ownership is very important, first thing. So working together with the local government, that's what we have done for CPFUs, working together with the local government line agencies from the conceptualization phase, one thing. The other thing is, when we are talking about cross-border or between two different countries, it's not necessary that one organization or the communities in one country can influence or can work together with the community or the government from the other country. So that's where we need to have a very good local partner whom we can work with and who has a very good relation with the local government line agencies, so that we can cooperate, coordinate, and work together. And the facilitation process will be very easy in that perspective. So 2 things, Pankaj, from my side to answer this question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. कोई और सवाल? Any other last question that you want to ask of anyone on the panel?
I want to ask a question to Professor Sharma.
Please.
Professor Sharma, when we talk about regional cooperation, so it has to be a unified voice, particularly when it comes to governance. And we see that within the nation also, we are struggling in ensuring that there is some kind of equilibrium, or in all the states when it comes to policies, plans, and all those aspects. So otherwise all those leaders within the nation would be the only voice at the regional level. So what is your suggestion as in terms of improving our own internal governance apparatus, particularly on disaster governance, including of course disaster finance also, so that our voice at the regional platform is one, and so that other countries also take a lesson from India as one of the most important and leader when it comes to the governance of hazards and disasters.
Badaji, is a very good question. And my answer will be very short because the time is going to over. I will say that any regional cooperation is possible when we have faith in each other. First of all, we should have mutual faith. We should know that this is this area, because we are all signatory to Sindai framework. We understand that these are the common thing. International cooperation or regional cooperation, it should be the priority. It should come in the national plan. As if you see our national plan, which is prepared by NDMA, regional cooperation is one chapter. So I think that type of commitment is required. And once we are at the same page, we understand that we are doing it for humanitarian, our objective is same, then I think there should not be any problem. Once we are suspicious and we see that this country is big, so they will take the leadership or something like that, this kind of false suspicions, they are hindrance. This is the biggest challenge in regional cooperation. In fact, we are all leaders. When we are working together, there is no one leader. It's a mutual thing which we are doing. It is for the human being. It is for the humanity. We are not doing for Indian or for Bangladeshi or for Nepali. I think so that concept should come. The Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which we are talking about, I think that should be explained to the people when we sit together. And once we are at the same page, then definitely there will be no problem. We will be working together, and this is the crux of success in ASEAN. They have faith in each other, and that's why there is no problem in funding. There is no problem. It is working so well. The ASEAN office you see in Jakarta, you will be amazed that. So I think that type of thing, and I was visualizing the same thing when we started the SARC Center here, but I'm sorry that it couldn't happen. And this can happen only when we believe in each other, we have some faith, we know that we are working for one cause, that is DRR. That is, then it is possible. Otherwise, we will say and try regional cooperation, but how much we will be successful, this is big question mark. So this is my experience of 30 years, 35 years in disaster risk reduction. My personal experience. I mean, it can you can differ with me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Being the moderator, I am appropriating 1 minute for myself to ask Professor Daanish one question of what do you think, Professor Daanish, the tension or contestation between the expert / technical knowledge and the traditional knowledge, is it real, or a part of it is perceived, and possibly what can be done? Because I hear just about everybody talk about the value of valuing traditional knowledge, if you like, and so basically the question is about the tension. Is it real or perceived, and something can be done about it?
I think in our case, in the South Asian case, it's very much a legacy of colonialism. If you actually look at our curriculum, if you actually look at the language that we are speaking, for example, right? Practically everyone in South Asia understands Hindi, thanks to the Hindi movies and dramas and so on and so forth. And oh my God, oh you speak Urdu, you speak Hindi. When I was traveling in India, everyone was like, oh my God, you speak such good Hindi. I was like, I don't even know Hindi, mate. I'm speaking Urdu. Oh really? I thought Urdu is really difficult. I was like, no, I'm speaking Urdu. I don't know how to speak Hindi. What are you talking about? So the point is that it's very much part of the sort of colonial curriculum that we have in schools. Everyone is basically raised in South Asia. It's sort of a very weird schizophrenic kind of an upbringing that all of us South Asians have. On the one hand, we absolutely love the language, the sort of structures of thinking, the attitudes about objectivity, about neutrality, about the science, and all the rest of it. And simultaneously, we're also very keen to declare anything. Oh, this is all superstition. Oh, this is all mythology, and this is religious stuff, and we don't care about that. But the same note, the same people who do that are simultaneously fascistically nationalistic. You call names to India, they'll wring your neck. You say something against Pakistan, they'll destroy you. Oh my God, they're hyper patriotic and that sort of thing as well. So there's a strange sort of a schizophrenia in our society. And I think that the colonial attitude, the whole concept of so-called development, forward march of history, is very much predicated upon that eventually we will all become, sort of Western. Don't tell anyone that I said that, but reality is that we will have big factories and we'll have big cars and we'll have big roads and we'll have big cities and everyone will wear, those sorts of things. So I think that it's a very deeply culturally embedded and historically embedded sort of an attitude. So the tension is very much real. Tension is very much real. Find me a word in Hindi or in Urdu which refers to the village or somebody from a village. It is almost equated with what we use the word pendu, which is the same thing as someone is stupid if they're from the village, for example, or at least that's the intonation. So I think it's very much a function, and it's not about about a pious declaration that let's recognize local knowledge for what it is. Reality is the system rewards Western knowledge, and system does not reward local knowledge. System awards privilege and prestige to someone with Western knowledge. I have students come to King's College London from India to learn about development. This is crazy. This is nuts. You're coming all the way from India, where you're talking about development. You're coming to London to learn what to do to India. That's bizarre, but that's the reality of it. And I think that it is my comments were meant more to sort of provoke a challenge to how we have produced ourselves, how we have produced ourselves as experts, how we have produced ourselves as educated people, how we have produced ourselves as modern subjects. And I think that before we even talk about local knowledge, I think the more important part is unlearning a lot of those attitudes that draw us into that sort of a oppositional role, if you will, intellectually, vis-a-vis different ways of knowing and different ways of living.
Thank you so much, Professor Daanish. I think I love the way you challenge the established paradigms or notions around anything, be it anything.
But sir, the established paradigms, what have they given us? We are where we are.
No, I'm appreciating of the fact that we have people who can challenge. That's great, because at the end we are all students. We are all learning. I think we always need an alternative paradigm. Thank you so much. I think because we have overshot time, and I understand that that Shobit must be cursing me. So I will pass on to Shobit and Animesh for the vote of thanks.
Shobit, can you
not
please?
at all. Yeah. So I would like to thank
Shobit, please.
all the panelists. Sorry, Animesh, you were saying something?
No, I'm saying please carry on, Shobit.
Yeah. I would like to thank all the panelists and the participants today. We've had much to learn, and it has been a very engaging, sort of, even if we've not gone into, a full-blown discussion, as in because it is all virtual and we have to go one by one to, each of us. But it has been a very engaging discussion today. And I think we have a lot to take away from the panelists today, as well as from the questions that our participants asked and the panelists answered. So I think we can wrap up today. In the interest of time, I'll keep it. I'll try to keep it. I've tried to keep it short. So I'll just request everybody to switch on their cameras for a moment so that we can click pictures. So I've got the picture. Animesh, would you like to share a little? Yeah. Hello, Animesh.
Yes, Shobit, sorry, I have a very unstable network here. But nonetheless, I'm very grateful to all the eminent panelists who took out their time to, share their insights with us. And it is not often that we get an opportunity to have a regional level discourse, particularly on disaster governance. And therefore, we find it very grateful that we had a representation from most of the South Asian countries here today. And we got insights from the government, from CSOs, from different NGOs who are working with government and the communities. Of course, we missed Kavita Bose today, and it would have been really good to get some perspective from Bangladesh as well. Nonetheless, this was a very insightful discussion, a lot of points to take forward from here. And I would like to thanks Pankaj for a very good moderation of this event. So this is it. I have to say thank you all for your time, for coming and participating and sharing your point of views. Thank you. Over to you, Shobha.
Thank you. Take care. All the best. Bye.
Thank you, Daanish. Thank you, everyone here today. Thank you, Pankaj, for moderating the event, and it was really wonderful to have your, your experience of all the decades, and you turned it into such a good event for us today. And thank you to all the panelists again, Professor Vinod Sharma, who's given us his valuable time, Dr. Neera Shrestha Pradhan, who's also been here with us today. Professor Daanish, I think he has left the meeting, but thank you to him too, and to last but not least to His Excellency Mr. M Q Haidari, who's present here. Thank you all, and we can close the meeting now. Thank you.